The best camera for vlogging and for YouTube. Let's compare the Sony RX100 V to the Canon G7X II. First things first, how do they look compared side by side? Alright, so let's compare these cameras side by side. I've built myself a rig on the cheap. This is the Canon 7X II. This is the Sony RX100 V. So how do these cameras behave in rather difficult lighting conditions? The Sony RX100 V seems to hold the autofocus pretty well, as well as the Canon. As I mentioned, I mean, it's pretty similar. Let's see what happens when we cover the lens and how fast it comes back. And they're pretty similar, actually. And as far as the picture goes, I think the Sony seems to have a little more dynamic range. What happens when I'm coming really close? Let's see how the autofocus reacts to that. That's typically what you would do when you're vlogging and you're somewhere showing around, follow me around, and you'd be moving and looking into the camera. But the purpose of this test is so you can see yourself, which one you like better, and how the picture looks in this very difficult lighting condition. The G7X II is a really good choice because you've got everything you need for vlogging. And in auto mode, it does a really good job when it comes to the picture quality. At the same time, we did an audio test as well. I've been switching back and forth with the audio, so you can decide yourself which one sounds better. When you've got the camera in your hand, that's also something that you consider when choosing a camera for vlogging. So you'd probably not come this close when vlogging, but still we're testing the sound here. And one more time, a little more further away. That's how I would sound if the camera was in my hand. Okay, that much for moving around. What if the cameras were sitting on the table on little tripods and I was moving back and forth? Let's see how well the autofocus is following me. And before I hit record, the RX100 had a really hard time focusing on my face. So I don't know why that is. Let's cover the lenses again, and then let's see how fast they come back. And what if the face detection seems to work? So what if I'm here and I was presenting an object like this camera? The Sony's there already, and the Canon seems to have a problem with closer objects. See that? Maybe it has been detecting my face in the background, and boom, back to the face, and let's try that again. And now the Canon has found, oh, see that? It's going back and forth. So the Sony is the winner here. It seems to find the focus point really well, whereas the Canon really has a hard time finding the right, there seems to be a problem with focusing closer objects, like this distance here. And the Sony, where I was actually trying to started complaining about the RX100, works really well with closer objects. But other than that, they're pretty similar. Okay? So the look of the camera is actually a matter of personal taste, but although they look very similar and share a lot of similarities, there are a couple of things significantly different from the technical side. So the Sony camera does 4K internally, although it's limited to, I think, 5 minutes. And when you're looking at a compact camera like this, it's probably not, it doesn't have the biggest priority, because I personally don't shoot in 4K with these compact cameras. With bigger projects, bigger cameras, you certainly need it as an option for post-production when you want to crop in or something. Plus, the Sony camera does have overheating issues with anything else than full HD in 30p. Technically, this goes to the Sony camera, because it does 4K. It's capable of doing 4K if you want that. As far as the stabilization goes, they are pretty similar. I have to admit I'm impressed with the optical stabilization with the Canon. The Canon casts a little more reddish images when shooting video. That's typical for Canon. I don't really like that. I have to admit I would go for the Sony because the color in auto mode looks a little more neutral. Plus, on top of that, it does have the S-Log II color profile, which is great if you want to match it to the bigger Sony cameras. I had used this in a fitness video project. This was actually my second camera. The client didn't know, but they loved the videos, and it was all good. In general, the Sony looks a little more neutral. Plus, on top of that, it does have the S-Log II, which looks absolutely gorgeous. You can have great images, almost looking like a Sony A7S II. That's pretty impressive for such a small camera. Well, slow motion and Canon, it doesn't really go together. It does 60p, whereas the Sony does 120 frames continuously, and even 240 frames in 4-second bursts. You even have end trigger, which I loved with the Sony FS700 camera, which means you're shooting for 4 seconds, and if you're happy with the shot, you can push the button and then it will save these 4 seconds in 24 frames a second. The buffer will be saved. So you don't have to shoot and fill up your SD card. That's a really handy function, which I really love. So, but other than that, 100p continuously, that's also very impressive for a compact camera. I've used that, for instance, in this particular shot, this kind of lookbook video for Instagram models, and the 100 frames were just looking great. In combination with the S-Log II color profile, it looks like I had a FS7 or something. I actually just shot it handheld with this little thing here. The good thing is nobody's going to bother asking you what you're doing. You could be looking like a boyfriend or a friend snapping pictures from the model. Although technically they have the same capacity, the batteries, the battery consumption in the RX100 is ridiculous. I mean, anything else than full HD 30p, it's gonna drain batteries within, like, I would say minutes. You can't really work with it. So if you're planning to using throughout the whole day, you're at an expo or spending, traveling somewhere and you want to shoot the whole day, unless you want to carry around 4, 5, 6 batteries, I'm not exaggerating, that many batteries with you, you should go for the Canon because it doesn't eat up that much battery as the Sony camera. So that's a big minus for the Sony camera. If you want to shoot more cinematography shots like I did with this example here, then it doesn't matter as much because you're shooting short sequences. But since we're talking about vlog cameras, this one goes to the Canon camera, definitely. So the autofocus, I say, I'm slightly leaning towards the Sony camera, but sometimes it loses the focus and then it's having a hard time finding it back again. I'd say they're equal. Although technically the face detection should be better in the Sony. Maybe I'm just getting the settings wrong. If you know a setting that's rock solid, just let me know in the comments. But as far as the autofocus goes, I'd say these cameras are pretty equal. So both cameras have built-in Wi-Fi, NFC, ND filters, which is sunglasses for your sensor, if you don't know what that is, built-in flashes. But the Sony camera does have a built-in viewfinder, which could be handy when you're outside in bright sunlight and you can't really see the screen. I don't know, what I sometimes do is using the viewfinder as to stabilize the camera when it's like sitting in front of your eye, the other side. It stabilizes the camera a little more. If you're used to that, I mean, it's kind of awkward using a small camera like this with a viewfinder, but when you're outside, that might be something that you would need. So the Sony camera does have a viewfinder, whereas the Canon camera doesn't. With these compact cameras, it's not really a deal breaker not to have a viewfinder, in my opinion. Of course, for vlogging, it makes sense to see yourself in the screen, although you shouldn't be looking at the screen, but rather into the lens. You're going to be looking above the audience, okay? Look into the lens. But still, you want to see what's going on, so that's a pretty handy thing. The difference is the Canon camera does have a touch screen, and that's very important. If you want to focus on something, you just tap that area and the camera will focus on that point, whereas the Sony doesn't have that. I think that's a pretty big deal for a vlogging camera. So this goes to the Canon camera, the touch screen. As for additional functions, both can do time-lapse, but the Sony camera, you have to buy an app from the App Store so it can shoot time-lapse, whereas the Canon does have time-lapse built in already when you buy it. You have to spend extra money, although this camera is pretty expensive, and then you have to get an app on top of that. That's how it is. I got the time-lapse for my Sony camera, and it works really well. So if you're planning on doing time-lapse, the Canon camera is the right thing, the right choice for you out of the box. Well, we're talking about videos, about vlogging, but one thing to mention, the Sony camera does 24 frames per second bursts, whereas the Canon does 8 frames per second bursts. If you're into photography, that might be something that you would want to consider, but for vlogging, it doesn't really matter. This goes to the Sony camera, but it's not really a big point. So what is my conclusion with these cameras? I would say when the main focus is vlogging and nothing else, I would go for the Canon camera, since this is also significantly cheaper than the Sony camera. Currently it retails for $680 on Amazon, whereas the Sony camera retails for $950, like $270 difference. There's a reason why many YouTubers and bigger YouTubers have chosen the Canon G7X II for vlogging. But if you want to have these extra options that the Sony camera is giving you, and if you're planning to do a lot of post-production, if you want to have the picture profile, if you want to have these nice looking imagery, the slow motion, the 240 frames per second, don't get confused. They're marketing it with 1000 frames per second, which is actually at a much lower resolution. We're talking about full HD. So this camera does full HD 240 frames a second in 4-second bursts. So that's a very nice feature. So if you want to have all these filmmaker cinematography options, then the Sony camera is certainly something that you should consider. But it's significantly bigger, but you're getting pretty much the performance, like within limits, the performance of a Sony a7S II camera at the palm of your hand. It's really impressive. But the battery life and the overheating issue are two big flaws in a otherwise very impressive camera. So what are your thoughts about these cameras? Do you have any experience with either one? If you ask me, this is my camera, the Sony RX100 Mark V, because I'm a professional videographer. I want to have these options, the picture profile, the slow motion and everything. And I do use that. So that's why I bought this. I borrowed this one from a friend to make this video. And if you're planning on doing only vlogging and you want to have a great camera out of the box, a well-rounded, great vlogging camera, this is the right choice for you. If you're planning on buying either one of these cameras, please consider checking out my Amazon store. That's pretty much what I use on a daily basis, all these things that you get to see there. And I've added some comments for you so you can see why I actually chose these specific products for my daily work. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. Don't forget to hit the bell, like this video, comment which camera is actually your choice and what you think about these compact high-end cameras. And if you think I forgot something, please put it into the comments. Let's share our knowledge with each other. And thank you for watching. See you next time.